Speaking of the Wall Street, Main Street divide, I wanted to ask you to react to another clip. This one is Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan Chase, on appearing on Fox News. Let's listen. Let's hear what he had to say, what his prediction was.
Do you personally expect a recession?
I am going to defer to my economist at this point, but I think probably that's a likely outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because markets, I mean, when you see a 2,000 point decline, it sort of feeds on itself, doesn't it? Because it makes you feel like you're losing money in your 401k, you're losing money in your pension. You got to cut back.
Yeah. I always remind people markets aren't always right, but sometimes they are right. And I think this time they are right because they're just pricing in uncertainty at the macro level and uncertainty at the micro level, at the actual company level. And then how it affects consumer sentiment, it's hard to tell. You know, consumers still have jobs. Wages are going up at the low end, which I think is a good thing. But if companies start cutting back, yeah, the consumer sentiment changes and business sentiment changes. I think you've already seen business sentiment change a little bit. Hopefully, no one's wishing for that, but hopefully if there is one, it'll be short. But I do think fixing these tariff issues and trade issues would be a good thing to do.
So you also have predicted a recession. So you and Jamie Dimon could open up a consulting firm together. No, I jest, obviously. But what are your thoughts on his prediction?
Yeah, well, one of the differences between Jamie Dimon and myself, other than the difference in the level of wealth and income that we enjoy, is the fact that I'm a critic of capitalism in part because it is constantly having recessions.
Right.
I mean, the National Bureau of Economic Research, a very respected outfit, basically part of the U.S. government establishment in Washington, times them. It looks at how often they happen. And they happen on average every 4 to 7 years. That's their result. In every country and in every phase of history where capitalism has settled in as the economic system, it has a crash every 4 to 7 years. It's kind of amazing. Some of them are short and shallow. Some of them are long and deep. The Great Depression took us over 11 years, and we had an unemployment rate of 25% in 1933. That was a long, deep one. And by the way, in case people think they're over, they're not. The 2008 was the second worst in capitalism's history, and the 2020 during the pandemic was the third worst. So we're not out of the woods. This is a system that has tried for hundreds of years to get rid of these crashes, and it has failed as a system to do it. That's why we still have them. There's no other word that's honest about capitalism other than this one. It is a fundamentally unstable system. When I teach this in the university, I lean across the podium with my students and I hesitate, for the pregnant pause effect. And then I say, if you live with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. And try to get them the sense, why do you accept a system that is so flawed as that? Well, let's take the 4 to 7 average. When was the last one? 2020, the midst of the pandemic. Okay, it's now 2025. We're due. So it's not just me and it's not just Jamie Dimon. Right. Loads of people on Wall Street are very aware that we are due for one. Now, here comes the crucial thing. Uncertainty makes matters worse. It's very important that folks understand that Mr. Trump, among the many contradictions of his policy, is above all contradictory in when he makes the tariffs uncertain. Look at what he did. On again, off again with Mexico. On again, off again with Canada. Higher, lower. Exemption for this, exemption for that. He's now negotiating, apparently, with the Japanese and the South Koreans about the tariff. You know what that means? Uncertainty. Why is that a problem? Think for a minute as if you were a big businessman or woman. Right? You're sitting there, you're deciding, am I going to invest the profits I've earned the last couple of years in a big new addition to my factory, my office, my store? Am I going to rebalance by Oh, I don't know. Well, I'll give you a concrete example. A few days ago, two Japanese automobile companies, Mitsubishi and Nissan, I believe, told the Mexican government their plans to build billion-dollar car producing, either car parts or total cars in Mexico. Why? Well, it's on hold. Why is it on hold? Well, that's because they don't know whether the rationale, which is to do it in Mexico, pay people very little, ship it across the border into Texas, no tariff, whether that will be in place or not. They can't make a commitment that they had planned on. Yeah, but that's 10,000 workers in Mexico that had planned on a job, many of whom had already moved into the areas where the factory would be built so they could take the. I mean, you can't do what Mr. Trump is doing. Why? Because every corporation, I mean, every sizable corporation in the United States, out of the United States, is saying, wait, let's not make a decision. We don't know what the tariff situation will be. We can't figure out what our supply chains will look like, what tax situations we. And when they hold back, let's remember how capitalism works. If the corporate sector holds back, that means money they earned is not being returned into the economy. And that's when that happens, that's called a recession. That's why the prediction of a recession now has two things going for it. The fact that it's due by the 4 to 7 average, which capitalism has never escaped, and by this added uncertainty, which is leading to every kind of effect you do not want. So here's the conclusion. Mr. Dimon, who lacks, the one thing I don't have his wealth, but I know my economic theory and he doesn't. It's okay, why should he? He's very successful in what he does. But when he says he doesn't know what it'll be and yeah, that's nice. He doesn't want to scare people because it's in his business interest not to. But if you were going to bet, the last two recessions we had were doozies, really bad. And people don't understand. In 2020, one half of the American labor force was unemployed during that year. Not all at the same time, so it doesn't show up as a 50%, but it was staggering. And the 2008 and 9, which we all went through, was equally staggering. So we're not in a good time to have a recurring kind of problem happen, on top of which a global insecurity. And all of this has to be added to the following. Given the horrible uncertainty now, it's actually about to get worse as all of the different countries in the world enter into debates at home about whether to retaliate, how to retaliate, how big the retaliation. Those are all going to impact all kinds of decisions that nobody wants to move. Everybody is frozen. And it's beginning to leak into the consumers because they don't know either what's going to happen, the working class. So they are beginning to hold back. There was a recent story talking about how tourists are not coming to the United States anymore the way they did. By the way, a whole nother cost of this, and that's all Trump. That's all reacting to Trump's language and to the whole theater that he mounts there. And no one can quite figure out how bad that's going to be and how long that's going to last. Canadians are not going south for their summer. Florida is already showing serious cutbacks in orders of Canadians who normally go to Florida for the sun. Blah, blah, blah. All of these things, if you have too many of them, they make the downturn not shallow and short, but long and deep.